It's my absolute privilege to introduce Betsy as our second keynote speaker. Dr. Lavolette is an associate professor of English at Kyoto Sangyo University. She holds a PhD in second language studies with a focus on call from Michigan State University. And she was previously director of the Language Resource Center at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania in the US. Her current research focuses on professional development, language learning spaces, and forging connections between scholars and literatures of such spaces in the US, Japan, and globally. She is currently Programs Director of the International Association for Language Learning Technology, facilitator of the Social Justice and Language Teaching Working Group for Kyoto GELT, and a co-editor of the Language Center Handbook, which will be available later this month. So we're really happy to have her here today as our speaker. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Lavolette to begin her talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Actually, let me go backward on my slides just for a second so you can see my title slide here. So I want to first just say thank you so much to the JOLT call organizers for inviting me. In particular, thank you to Erin Noxon, who has been amazing in helping to walk me through the process and getting me all the information that I needed to be here today and talk with you. Excuse me, it is quite an honor to be one of these keynote speakers for JOLT Call. So thank you. So today I want to talk about not only my predictions for the future of call in Japan, but also how we can influence that future. So I'm going to be making some predictions, but I'm also wondering what your predictions might be on the different areas that I'm planning to talk about. So you can either scan this QR code with your phone, you can put in that short URL, or here's a link in the chat again. There's just a few questions. The first one is about your context. If we have time at the end, I may break down those responses by context, and we can see if people at teaching young learners are predicting something different from higher ed, for example. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a moment and fill that out. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my identity crisis. So here we go. So are you a call person? If you wouldn't mind, just raise your hand either on your video or put on the little the hand raise icon. I just want to see how many people would identify as a call person, whatever that means to you. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people all going up to 16 people. Okay, so about 16 people out of 60 here. That's a pretty good ratio for a call conference. So if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said yes, no hesitation whatsoever. And I would also say yes today, no hesitation. But about a year and a half ago, I would have needed a moment to think about this question. This is still showing me we've got hands raised. Okay, so I came to Japan in 2018, and I just see popping up in my view, Tom Robb. He's the major reason that I'm here today. So thank you, Tom. I came to Japan in 2018, and I've been kind of rethinking my role in the profession ever since then. I had an MA that was focused on call. My PhD was about call. And then immediately after I graduated, I became the director of a language center in a small college in the US. And an important part of that role was providing professional development to language teachers, especially regarding technology. So there was no doubt I was a call person. But then when I became a professor and I moved to Japan, suddenly I was no longer holding workshops. I had very little idea of what my colleagues were doing with technology. But I felt that my skills and my interests in technology were really only useful to me and to my classes, but not really useful to other people anymore. So I came to kind of the premature conclusion that we were in an era where technology was ubiquitous and it was a given for all teachers. But emergency remote teaching proved to me that that was not the case. Technology was not a given for many teachers. And I was quite shocked, actually, to discover that some of my colleagues didn't even know how to use our learning management system, Moodle, despite it having been available at my university for over 15 years. So undoubtedly, there were a lot of factors that prevented the faculty from learning to use Moodle and other technology tools. Maybe they didn't feel any sort of sense of urgency. Maybe they didn't get very good quality training. And in some cases, there was probably a total lack of training, like for the part-time faculty and any faculty members who are not comfortable working in Japanese. And to me, this highlighted the importance of professional development that can reach all teachers, not just the full-time tenured Japanese-speaking teachers. So basically, I saw a need to reach out to the part-time and contract faculty and to those who are less comfortable with Japanese. And this led to me creating a help group on Teams. I don't know if you're familiar with Teams, but it's, well, similar to our Discord server, right? So you can text people, you can have video chats. And through this team, I've been answering questions via text, video chat, and we've even held a mini conference this year. So I felt a kind of renewed sense of purpose in being able to help people who were struggling to teach in a very stressful situation that they were not adequately prepared for. And through doing this, I reaffirmed my own identity as a call person. And I think I'm not the only faculty member who is taking on this extra work of supporting our fellow teachers. Maybe some of you who identified as call people out there, maybe you're doing the same thing in your institutions. So for me, if one good thing has come out of this pandemic, it's this renewed sense of purpose in my work. So it's not just my research, not just teaching my own students, but helping other faculty members as well. So yes, I can say for sure I am a call person. So with that renewed sense of my identity as a call person, I'd like to make some predictions about the future of the field. Before I do that, though, I want to take a look at a prediction from nearly 35 years ago. You may have seen this quote before. Ray Clifford, who was the provost of the Defense Language Institute in the US, said this at his opening keynote to Calico in 1987. While computers will not replace teachers, teachers who use computers will eventually replace teachers who don't. So I think this has often been quoted as an argument against the idea that technology is the enemy of teachers. I'd like to follow this up with an update from another, another pillar of the field of call. You may know Brian Smith. 35 years later, this year, in his talk at the Georgetown University Roundtable, Brian Smith said, language teachers are not being replaced by teachers who use technology, but we are gradually or not so gradually becoming those very teachers. And I think this is so true, especially in the last year and a half. So many language teachers have been thrust into using technology, whether they want to or not. So what happens next? I have some specific predictions to share for what I think will happen in Japan. So this slide, this slide serves as a kind of overview for my talk, and I'll be giving details of each of these areas later, but let me just briefly touch on them right now. So my first prediction is that I think that online instruction is going to very rapidly disappear when this current crisis is resolved. And in fact, it seems to have already disappeared at the K through 12 level already. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But in certain areas, I think it may be possible to maintain a certain level of online instruction and maybe even increase the scope in some areas. My second prediction is that I think that bring your own device will become standard in higher ed and will probably also increase quite a bit in the K through 12 levels. Third, I think we're going to see some great gains in the implementation of education that takes learning differences into account, such as universal design for learning. And I would make that prediction across the educational spectrum. And then finally, I predict that our institutions will expect us to be prepared, to be ready to switch to remote teaching at any time, especially at the university level. So after I elaborate on these predictions, then I want to provide my ideas about how we can influence how this future evolves and what our role might be in helping our fellow teachers prepare. So in other words, what is our role in professional development? So starting with online instruction, I'm wondering what you think. So I'm going to switch over to the results of this survey. Okay, we've got 40 people who have filled this out. Let me make it a little bit bigger if I can. Okay, so we have overwhelmingly higher ed context here, but a few others, young learners, senior high school. So like I was saying that I could break this down by groups, but I think I'll just keep everything together for now. And we can look at it again at the end if people want to see in more detail. So what do you think will happen with online teaching and learning? Most people are saying we will keep some limited teaching and learning online. Next biggest category, keep a lot of teaching learning online. And then quickly return to the pre-pandemic levels. So we'll see if I can change your minds about this in any areas. So I want to first talk a little bit about what has been happening at US universities. Many US colleagues are predicting that hybrid courses are going to become the norm there because the students will demand it. So what I mean when I talk about hybrid is if you have a first year language course, this is the very basic elementary level language course, it's often held 5 days a week at the university level. And in this hybrid model, for example, it might be 3 days a week face-to-face and then 2 days online. And this is because the students will demand it. They have become quite happy with being able to have a little more flexibility in their learning. But in Japan, I'm predicting that without some sort of intervention, this will completely drop back to pre-pandemic levels. So why am I saying this? First of all, unlike in the US, I have not seen much demand from students. For the most part, they seem to be eager to get back into the classroom. And this is despite the fact that many young people are communicating online more than face-to-face, even before the pandemic, of course. Online communication is real life. It is for us and it is for young people as well. Well, I don't know about you. I'm definitely not one of these young people. But there are few adult students in Japan, meaning students who have responsibilities like full-time jobs and families who need more flexibility in their studies. But that said, third and fourth year university students who are doing their job search are definitely benefiting right now from flexible class schedules. And so are the students in programs like education and nursing who need to attend practicums that normally take them away from the face-to-face classroom. So these students could make their voices heard and affect change, but I am not so certain that they will. The next reason that I'm making this prediction is because, well, authorities by their very nature are conservative institutions. Mixed schools, universities, they resist change. And I think that they're going to force a return to the old normal as quickly as possible. And we saw that last fall when MEXT named and shamed the universities that had more than 50% of their courses online. And many of the universities simply bowed to that pressure to move their classes back to face, even if students and faculty felt that it wasn't safe. So I think that these conservative authorities are going to have a lot to say about online instruction. Third reason that I'm making this prediction is I think there may be a fundamental misunderstanding in society at large, including among our fellow teachers, about what online instruction is. For many people, online instruction, online learning has been confused with emergency remote teaching. And emergency remote teaching and online learning are also confused with simply using Zoom. And in fact, online learning is not the same thing as emergency remote teaching. It requires extensive planning and course development, which was simply not possible at the beginning of the pandemic. But unfortunately, not everyone has improved their online teaching since then. Another reason that I'm making this prediction is I think there is a failure by, by universities in particular to consider the difference between class types. For example, lecture, a large lecture versus a zemi, and first year versus fourth year classes. So I'm currently teaching, I'll give you the extremes here. I'm teaching a lecture for more than 200 students. I'm teaching a 20 student content-based class, and I'm teaching a seminar for 3 students. So the way these classes work online is very different. And of course, it's different face-to-face as well. But in my opinion, the lecture courses should still be held online at the discretion of the instructor. For me, personally, making short videos like you see here with quizzes interspersed with them works even better than lecturing in the classroom. I never have to tell students to be quiet so that everyone can hear. Students can review the lectures as many times as they like at whatever playback speed they like. And with a 200 plus student lecture, we were never going to have much interaction in the classroom anyway. So I don't feel that that's lacking. I also think there's a big difference between online teaching for our first year students who don't know each other. They're experiencing university life for the first time. And third and fourth year students who often know each other already, are very familiar with how the university works. And at least this year, they already have experience learning online. And in my experience, these students appreciate the flexibility of online classes, especially when they're on the job market. So, although I'm predicting that online learning is going to fall off to these pre-pandemic levels, I think we can make some efforts to prevent this. And as call experts, we are well suited to argue for the effectiveness of online learning where appropriate. I'm not saying across the board, but where appropriate. And I'm personally not qualified to argue for that at the K through 12 level, but at universities, I think that I already mentioned about lecture courses. For these upper level classes, the simple argument that we're supporting students' job search may be all we need. Most universities are so eager to help students find jobs that they'll do anything to support that. And clearly, some classes like lectures are better suited to being taught online than others. So another strategy I think that we can use to argue for this is to cite the research that we referred to when developing our courses. So, for example, in my case, thinking of the lecture course that I've put on demand, as they say. I hate that term, on demand, because I'm not Netflix, but I call it asynchronous course. I looked at the research by Guo, Kim, and Rubin. They were looking at the edX MOOC platform. If you remember MOOCs, these are massively open online courses, mainly supported by videos and quizzes. And they looked at 6.9 million video watching sessions for 4 STEM courses. So these are science, technology, engineering, math courses, so that may not apply directly to humanities or language courses. But I still think that their results can be useful to us. They looked at engagement with these videos, and the way they measured that was by the time that the students spent watching the videos and whether they attempted to answer multiple choice questions immediately after watching those videos. So I want to share with you their recommendations. I didn't follow all of these, but I do want to share some that I found useful. So first of all, segment videos into chunks shorter than 6 minutes. This is something I took very seriously. Most of my videos were around 3-4 minutes, sometimes shorter. I think that it's very difficult for students to process a lot of content, especially in their second language, and the shorter videos are better. Next, videos that intersperse an instructor's talking head with slides are more engaging than slides alone. And what I did with this was I either put my talking head on the slide itself while I was making the videos, or sometimes I recorded a very short intro that was just my face, and then recorded the slides separately and combined the videos. Try filming in an informal setting. If you're like me, that was my only choice anyway, to film in my kitchen. So that was easy. Speakers with high enthusiasm are more engaging. I definitely noticed this. The first couple of videos that I recorded, I was very serious, and I bored myself when I watched them. So after that, I tried to be much more enthusiastic and show students my own joy in the material. And then finally, I'm not so sure about this recommendation. They do not need to purposefully slow down. Yeah, I don't recommend, or I certainly wouldn't advocate for speaking extra slowly, but I think it's important not to speak too quickly for our learners as well, especially when you're being enthusiastic about something. However, it is easy for students to adjust the speed of videos, make it slower or faster, assuming that you show them how they can do that. So moving back to my predictions, one area where I think we may be able to increase online learning is in virtual international experiences, such as study abroad. There are lots of different options for this. So for students in Japan, we can think of the host institution as the institution in Japan. If they are, I just said that opposite of what I meant. The host being the university abroad that they're going to. If they have online courses that our students can take, and then our institutions offer courses that the would-be study abroad students could take. In addition, supporting students both before they go, they could take online courses at the host institution. If they actually make it there and go to the institution abroad, then while they're there, they can be taking courses at their home institution and supporting some continuity there. And then finally, when they come back, again, they can stay connected with the host institution. And I've seen a lot going on lately around virtual exchange, teletandem, and a little bit new to me is this idea of virtual internships. So why do I think we have some opportunity here? Well, first of all, I think that study abroad offices are eager to get back to work. They want to be involved in this work. But we also have this greater familiarity with online classes now. It doesn't seem so out there that a student could get credit for an online course. I'm not totally sure about this, but it seems to be that institutions have a bit more control over the study abroad options that they offer versus MEXT dictating everything. And finally, I think that students and parents want more options for study abroad. They want cheaper study abroad. Maybe they can't afford to actually go to the host country. We're still worried about COVID, of course. There are also worries about safety in some host countries overseas. And people just want the flexibility of, for example, if they are adding a teaching certification to their degree, they may not have the time in their schedule to actually go abroad. And as further evidence for this trend, here are 7 presentations just from the month of May about virtual international experiences. And I know that there's at least 4 presentations about virtual international experiences at this conference. So if you've got one of those sessions coming up, give it a plug in the chat and we can all make sure to check out your presentation. And I'd like to point out something that the Study Abroad SIG forum presenters mentioned back in May. So they were reporting on their participation in COIL, this collaborative online international learning project, which is a fairly complicated system. And they said that professional development is needed for effective exchanges. I think that's true for COIL. I think that's also true for any other system that we try to set up. So I'm going to come back to this idea of professional development later. But for now, let me move on to my next prediction. So bring your own device. What did you guys say? What did you think would happen with BYOD? All right, I'm seeing the largest group is saying over 80% BYOD. So that's pretty much ubiquitous, 40 to 80%, under 40%. You'll be surprised, actually, we are already about here, about 40%. I have no idea. Okay, so go back to this. Okay, so here is the most current data that I was able to find. At universities, in 2016, there was already over 30% BYOD. And if they went through with their plans by 2018, should have been already almost 40% BYOD universities. High schools are a little bit lower percentage, around 24% in 2020. These are more current data. And in addition, about 36% allowed the use of students' own devices. So my prediction is that the BYOD rate will continue to increase. And why am I making this prediction? Well, first of all, even if your institution doesn't have BYOD, congratulations, you've already implemented it if you are online at all. If you've been teaching online, you've been dealing with the students' own devices on an emergency basis. And at the beginning of online teaching last spring, we couldn't predict what devices our students would be using. My university, in fact, told students that a smartphone was enough, so we couldn't even assume that they were using laptops or desktop computers. And this was a particular issue for one course that I teach. I'll just give you a little bit of background about this course. This was developed by Tom Robb, and I've done my best to take over for him. JOHO is our affectionate name for a course called English Information Literacy. All of our first-year English majors have to take this course, and they learn the basic usage of technology for their English classes. So the learning management system, email, Word, etc. It is a task-based course, so they are actually using these tools. And I am the coordinator. There are 5 sections in total. So as the coordinator, I had to consider the information literacy, both of our incoming students, but also of the other instructors who are teaching this course. And I had to consider how the students would be supported. In the pre-pandemic era, we were all using this horrible looking giant desktop computer, but we all had the same thing. So it was easy to predict what was happening and what would go wrong. Also, it's synchronous classes in the face-to-face classroom, of course, and students could talk to their peers, their TA, their teacher when they had problems. But once we entered the pandemic era, suddenly, I have no idea what they might be using from one day to the next. Unfortunately, it was difficult for them then to ask their peers for help. TAs were eliminated, so there was just the teacher who could help them. And we offered this course initially mostly asynchronously, but I found that adding synchronous sessions is actually a much better idea. So I made instructions for this course with the iPhone in mind as the kind of least common denominator, but with tasks that could be done on any device. Predictably, students didn't know how to use their devices in many cases, so there was lots of troubleshooting. And what we were dealing with is what I'm calling uncontrolled BYOD. There are unlimited devices, but unfortunately that limits the instructional possibilities. If I could somehow, if I had maybe 36 hours in a day, I could create instructions for them on every device you could think of, but it's simply not possible. But happily, we have moved to controlled BYOD starting in spring 2021, at least for our first year students. Unfortunately, though, the impact hasn't been as great as I had hoped it would be, because students don't always have the devices that they're supposed to have. Although we've asked students to have laptops, sometimes actually they have a tablet instead, which is really not the same thing. So my question is, how should we support these students, both the students who do and do not have the devices that they're supposed to have? And how do we support the teachers who need to help the students who have this variety of devices? You can probably guess my answer is going to be professional development. And I will talk more about that at the end. So let's move on to my next prediction. I want to talk about universal design for learning. So let's see what you had to say about this. The largest one is, what is universal design? Okay, I was afraid of this. Don't worry, I will tell you all about it. The next largest category here is that it will be used more. This is what I'm hoping. The same, and then some other answers here. So let me start by explaining what universal design for learning is. So let me just preface this by saying I'm by no means an expert on universal design, but I believe it's important to support all learners, and I think this provides us with a system for doing so. Universal design for learning is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. So what does this really mean? There are three major guidelines for universal design, and all of this very helpful information is available on the CAST website. The guidelines are, first, engagement. Learners differ in the ways that they can be motivated to learn. Some prefer novelty, others prefer routine. Some like to work by themselves, others like to work in groups with their peers. So providing multiple options for engagement is essential. And that's really the key for universal design, multiple options. So multiple options for engagement. Next, representation. Learners differ in the ways that they perceive and understand information. For example, learning differences like dyslexia, language and cultural differences may require different ways of approaching content. And again, providing options for this representation is the important point. And finally, the last guideline is about action and expression. Learners differ in the ways that they can express what they know. So students who have executive function disorders, for example, may approach learning tasks differently than other learners. Some learners may better express themselves in writing, others better in speech, and vice versa. And providing options, again, is the key here. So what's the relationship between UDL and CALL? Well, I think that technology can make it easier to offer educational resources that follow UDL guidelines and make these options available to our students. So I am predicting that we will see a great increase in the use of universal design. And why am I making this prediction? First of all, there seems to be a growing recognition of ability and learning differences. This is a little piece of an infographic from the Asahi Shimbun in 2019, and it shows that the number of students who attended elementary and junior high schools who have certain learning differences like ADHD and autism more than doubled from 2007 to 2017. Also note that during the same period of time, the total number of students in the schools actually decreased. So this is a very significant increase. At the university level, this shows some similar data. If we look from 2007 again to 2017, we're seeing a six-fold increase. And I think the very interesting thing about this graph is which of these differences is growing. So if you look at, for example, this yellowish color, orthopedic impairment, that's the same, basically the same all the way across. But if we look at this light blue area, health impairment or chronic disease, this increased vastly across time. And then this orange wasn't even acknowledged before 2015. So I think we can understand from this that it's not so much that learning differences have increased as they have been increasingly recognized over time. A related issue that is that universities are competing for a shrinking college-age population, so they need to be able to support all learners. This graph shows the population of 18-year-olds in Japan by year, and you can see it's been decreasing. That's all it's doing these days. Here's 2021, and it's predicted to continue decreasing. Another reason that I'm making this prediction is I think that the pandemic has emphasized the importance of accessible technology. Technology has been the link between teachers and students. So it really brings this idea of accessibility for all students into sharp relief. And Here's some recent presentations on this topic at several different conferences in the past 6 months or so, 7 months. Oh, it's already June, isn't it? Since last November. And you will notice a lot of some repeated names in here. I'm hoping that we can get more people engaged in this topic. Also, a recent call for chapters for an edited volume. Unfortunately, the deadline has passed, but I think I may have seen one of the co-editors here if you'd like to put any information about this into the chat. So whatever happens, though, we'll be able to look forward to some more scholarship on this topic coming out soon. And there's an upcoming conference with universal design as the theme. I'm really looking forward to this conference. It looks amazing. And last night, even in the keynote, Dr. Goda mentioned universal design for learning. So how can we do this? How can we learn more about universal design and support all learners? We need professional development. And I know that I personally need to understand universal design in much more detail. So let me move on to my final prediction. So this is about disaster preparedness. And let's see what you had to say about this. The largest number of people says our institutions will demand that teachers be ready for online instruction at any time. Next group, our institutions will not prepare to move online. And I have no idea. Yeah, that's probably a pretty safe prediction. So my prediction is, yeah, we're gonna have to be ready. Although I think that most instruction is going to return to the physical classroom, I think we will need to be prepared to shift online again, not just during the current pandemic, but future public health or natural disasters may interrupt instruction unless we're ready to shift back to online. And I think that emergency remote teaching is no longer going to cut it. I think we need to provide high quality online learning experiences for students. So why am I making this prediction? Well, first of all, we have already proved that this online transition is possible. There's no going back now. We cannot say that we can't do it. This extended COVID crisis, I think, should serve us as a warning for what may be coming. I hate to say it, but we may have this sort of problem again in the future. The disaster-prone nature of Japan. We have tsunamis, we have earthquakes, we have typhoons. If there's an earthquake in Osaka, my students can't come to the university in Kyoto, then in the past, we just canceled classes. But I think we may be expected now to hold our classes online, or at least hybrid, so that students don't have to be interrupted, which is the last thing here. Prevent those interruptions to learning. One thing that I have found frustrating about the online teaching situation is just how underprepared our universities were compared to the US. Online learning is not new, but you wouldn't know that from looking at many universities. Basically, I think that many teachers in Japan seem to believe they didn't need to learn to use technology, even learning management systems, or develop online teaching skills. And at the same time, universities didn't do that much to promote the technology use or help teachers develop these skills. So in 2020, we had to reinvent online learning yet again. And if we don't prepare for these future disasters, then I think we're going to be back here again, year after year. And in my opinion, emergency remote teaching is not something we should repeat. We should be prepared to switch back to online instruction again as needed. But if we let our institutions dictate how that will be done, they are going to choose the option that's most flexible for students and most unsustainable for us as teachers. And that option is hyflex. This is a very scary word, in my opinion. So let me just explain it a little bit. Of course, you know, fully in person, synchronous in the classroom, using the classroom technology, fully online at the other end. It could be synchronous, it could be asynchronous, using students' own devices. Hybrid has some combination of these things, face-to-face and online. HyFlex is the teacher is in the classroom. The students are in the classroom or online. The teacher has to provide content, both synchronous and asynchronous. Students might be tuning in synchronously or asynchronously. So basically, teachers are teaching 3 courses simultaneously, and we'll burn out if we're required to teach that way. So I think it's up to us to push for the most effective learning solutions that are also sustainable for teachers. And we need research that is showing the pros and cons of each approach. So here's a summary of my predictions. And how can we optimize this future? As I have been alluding to all along, my answer is higher quality, more inclusive professional development on specific topics of relevance to teachers. So what do I mean by professional development? Professional development is opportunities intended to aid faculty members in their professional development as a teacher. It could be a researcher, but I'm going to focus on teaching today. MEXT uses the term faculty development, or FD. So I might accidentally use that term sometimes too, but I'll try to stick with PD today. And I think that what we need to focus on here is inclusive professional development. So that includes part-time teachers and includes the non-Japanese speaking teachers. Yes, we should learn to speak Japanese, but institutions are hiring teachers who they know full well may not be able to participate in professional development in Japanese. And I think it's their responsibility to support those teachers. And it needs to be quality, so meeting the needs of teachers and fitting the teaching context. And I'll come back to the idea of context momentarily. There are many different forms of professional development, and Amelia Ijiri and I wrote about this in detail, but basically we broke this down into 3 different categories. Professional organizations like JALT, yay, JALT call, online professional development, such as Online Teaching Japan. I think many of you have gotten a lot of good information from this group. And then what I want to focus on right now is institutional professional development, which I'm meaning the professional development provided by our workplaces like universities and schools. This could be online or offline workshops and webinars, lists of resources, and communities of practice. So why am I focused on institutional PD? Well, if we think about universities, they are required by MEXT to offer professional development. So we might as well make it useful. If we have to be there anyway, it should be something that is useful to us. I think K through 12 schools may have different rules, but at the very least, I do know that teachers are required to renew their teaching certification, and PD is a requirement for that. This model, I want to talk about a little bit. You may be familiar with the TPAC model. So in this model, this shows us the kinds of knowledge that teachers need: technological knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and content knowledge, and all of their intersections. But what I'd really like to point out right now is that these are all embedded in a context. So institutional PD knows about that context and can make the PD specific to the context. So for example, knowing what tools the institution provides, what their limitations are, what is supported, what is not supported. And if instructors are aware of these tools, then they can reduce the burden on students by using this limited tool set. But I would say that the PD offered by our institutions is inadequate. And I say this both from personal experience of enduring PD like you see here, and from the results of my recent research with Dennis Koyama. I think, Dennis, you're here, right? So we did a PD survey where we were targeting language teachers in higher ed. Unfortunately, I don't have any data for K through 12, so I'll leave that to somebody else to do that research. But we sent out a bilingual survey asking people's opinions and facts about the PD at their institutions. We got people responding from all over Japan. Probably some of you are here today. Thank you so much for responding to this survey. We had about even breakdown, male and female, a high number of L1 English speakers, and everyone who answered this survey was a teacher of English. Some of them also taught Japanese. The participants were highly educated with either an MA or a PhD. More than half of them were tenured, so they're probably overrepresenting the tenured faculty here. And about 79% of them were working at private universities. Give me a second here. So one of the questions that we asked was, based on the PD or FD sessions you've attended, what changes have you made to your teaching? About 41% of these were text responses, so I put them into categories. About 41% were positive, meaning that they said, I went to a session and I made this change. About 30% said, I made no changes to my teaching. About 7% were negative responses, meaning they said something like, this session was a big waste of my time. Another 15% said they didn't make any changes, but something like, the sessions are always very interesting. And then another 7% didn't really answer the question, but didn't say anything particularly negative or positive either. So another thing that is interesting about these responses is, of this 40%, Japanese L1 speakers made up more than a third. So what this says to me is that the faculty members who are not proficient in Japanese find the PD less effective. Maybe that's not surprising. But I think that based on these responses, these PD sessions are not very effective. Only 41% are making any changes. Another question we asked was, does your workplace survey teachers for topics of interest for PD and FD sessions? It seems like a very basic thing to do if you're going to offer PD sessions, but less than 40% said that their institutions are asking them this. So in other words, the topics are determined in a top-down fashion. So how can we improve institutional PD? I want to share some more comments from the respondents. So one thing we need to do is to reach out to the part-time teachers. As this teacher said, I'm often the only part-time teacher present. What's discussed isn't relevant to me. And they're often held at times I'm teaching at other universities. And holding these sessions online may be helpful with this last problem here. Other things we need to improve are the delivery. Active learning was talked about by several people. There's not any pre-study questions. There's rarely time for questions, making them the complete opposite of the active learning practices we should be following. And yes, I see the irony in me giving this kind of lecture to you and talking about active learning. And then another comment on this topic, there's no interaction in the PD sessions, 5 minutes at the end for questions. And here's that irony about lecturing slide after slide of text on how to do active learning. One other thing I'd like to show you from this survey is the topics that we asked teachers if they would be interested in attending sessions on. So the numbers that you see here, they're very small, but maybe you can see them, are the number of people who said that they would be likely or unlikely to attend a session. So for example, this first one, technology for language learning, we got the most positive responses on. 32 people, or 84% of the participants, said they would be very likely or likely to attend a PD session on this topic. So our colleagues want us to share our call expertise. So I think the first step is to ask our colleagues what topics they actually want to learn about. But it may be easier for them to respond to that if we provide some options. So based on my predictions, here are the needed professional development topics. Related to online instruction, best practices in online course design, effective virtual international experiences, supporting students who do or do not have their required BYOD devices, universal design, how to support all learners with a focus on learning differences, and disaster preparedness. So building courses for flexibly transitioning between face-to-face and online modes. So I think that we can and we will get our PD from various sources, and I think that's great that we have options like JALT and online groups like Online Teaching Japan. But I think that our institutions are best positioned to provide this contextually appropriate PD. But this PD needs to be more inclusive, and teachers should have input into the topics and the style of delivery. So in conclusion, I think that call practitioners and researchers have a significant role to play in optimizing this future that I'm predicting. And part of that is to provide higher quality, more inclusive professional development that responds to teacher needs. So thank you. I really appreciate you attending my talk today. Yes, I will upload my slides to Edzilla. And you can also contact me at my email address here if you'd like.
Well, let's do the questions first, and then we can end with a kind of round of applause after that. So, okay. So, does anyone have any questions for Betsy?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what you're feeling about you focus on bring your own device, but my feeling is the problems are in the software. So do you think there should be more focus on the software as opposed to the device?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So in my case, the only reason that it was even conceivable to be teaching students about technology through their own devices is because we have an institutional Microsoft, 365, so they can all log in to the exact same interface on the web, and I can teach them to use Word, PowerPoint, etc. But if they are all using, if they use their own version of Word that is an app on their computer, then there are these little differences that then suddenly they don't know how to indent a paragraph, or like everything is different. So yeah, I think software makes a huge difference. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And yes, I maybe will add some extra questions inside the Discord channel so other people can ask you further questions. Yeah.
Great.
There was a little conversation in the chat, I think Tom, Rob, Louise, or Hashi talking about how part-timers have no time to do PD. And why is it that they have to teach at so many different universities and things like that? Do you have any opinion on that or any insights on that?
Yeah, I think they're in a huge dilemma because yeah, they have to teach at so many universities to make ends meet. But if they have any ambition to no longer have to do that, then I think professional development would be helpful to them. But at the same time, then they don't have the time to do that. So I greatly sympathize with that. One thing that I think could help with that is continuing to offer our professional development online. Then there isn't the time that you need to commute at the very least. And should you unfortunately tune into a session that is a waste of your time, you can be out of there in a hurry and on to the next thing. Yeah, that is a systemic problem that I don't think that we can solve with the tools at my disposal. I would be very happy to hear other people's opinions on how we can help with that problem.
Okay, I'm just going through the comments in the chat now. Payman Borlori has highlighted the issue of perhaps PD for the sake of PD. Payman, do you want to ask a question about that?
Certainly. My feeling, and I have been part of BY's conferences with the ministers of education, and they keep saying about several things, which is that we want education to move forward, that learning should become multifaceted, especially keeping with the UN development goals. Currently, that is not really going on anywhere in the world, or the UN millennial development goals are not really like being achieved by really any given place. And they keep saying, well, we will do it using, the same things. But the problem is that if somebody has a good idea about moving education forward, it will be rejected by the ministers of education themselves, because if they find that they've lost control of basically the process, then they themselves become expendable, because after all, they're political positions, not because of the fact that they have more expertise than any other doctor in education.
Was there a question at the end?
Yes. So my point is, or my question is, given that, and given that we know that, there is a lot of statements about basically improving teaching, how do you go about it when we know that at the end of the day, most of the goals about PD is just ticking basically boxes? Yes, there was PD provided to all the teachers, and if you ask all of them, most of them, or 90%, if they could, say anonymously, they would say this stunk, and even that would not get into anywhere, because they would write in the final report, it was a huge success. We managed to perform something that no one else has done, and in such ways we are basically advancing, basically the faculty or the trainers' abilities.
Yeah, so actually what you're saying is very much echoing what the participants in our survey said about FD being this box ticking exercise. I think 2 people, in fact, used those exact words. It is a box ticking exercise. But the thing is that MEXT does not actually mandate what the FD is. That's up to the institutions. So I think we definitely can make a change in how and what is delivered and called FD or PD.
Good, thank you very much. James has another question about the rights to the lectures. James, do you want to ask the question to Betsy?
Yes, of course. I mean, Betsy, you mentioned recording lectures,
Mhm.
and I've got a question about who do you think should have rights to these lectures? I mean, there is a news article which I'll share now, which was that in America, a dead professor's videos were shown 2 years after his death. And also from my perspective as a part-time teacher, I mean, I'm not particularly, I'm stable now, but I mean, there could be the fact that when I left, the institution could still actually play my lecture video. So my question to you is, who do you think should have rights, and how should we protect the faculty member?
Yeah, that's a great question. Personally, I think that the faculty member who creates them should have the rights to that. And I mean, as we've already pointed out, a lot of people are teaching at multiple institutions. We're often going to be using the same materials, whether it's videos or anything else we produce at multiple institutions. And if one institution is going to claim that they own it, then that's a huge problem for us. And not so much in Japan, but well, no, I take that back. Very much so. In Japan, people are changing institutions regularly. We need to be able to take that output with us. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. We'd have to reinvent the wheel every 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard anything about institutions in Japan trying to claim ownership of faculty produced materials. I don't know what the legal situation is with that at all.
Okay.
Thanks,
no, I haven't, not yet. So I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, well, we'll fight it, won't we?
There's a couple more questions I'd like to read out, if that's okay. Heike has a question as well. Heike, about a peer-to-peer PD. Yeah.
Sorry, could you say that one more time?
Heike, did you have a question about peer-to-peer PD?
Oh.
Heike, Phil?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Oh, shall I read it out? Heike was just.
I just wanted to mention the other day there was. I noticed a couple of teachers who were really well trained, or felt they were well trained with all sorts of educational tools, and I was so impressed by it. And I asked them, how did you do it? And they said they had a kind of a peer-to-peer groups that they had as soon as emergency remote teaching started. So this is what as soon as remote teaching started, they initialized a peer-to-peer teachers group, and they shared their experiences, they shared their tools, etc. And I was really impressed. And there's also this very famous example of a technology company, Xerox, when they did the repair work of their copy machines. They had walkie-talkies where colleagues could just talk to each other on a continuous basis, so they didn't even need to train them because they trained themselves. So would that be a good model for teachers in future? And could that be institutionalized? Do you know of any peer-to-peer exchanges?
I haven't heard of anything about that, like as an organized system. Certainly people are doing a lot of that online right now with Facebook groups, for example. Yeah, OTJ is a good example. And I think that the group that I have set up on Teams is a similar thing as well, where colleagues will ask each other about like I couldn't get this assignment to show up in Teams. What do I do? And helping each other that way. Yeah. But I don't know about walkie-talkies. maybe a tool like Teams or Slack has kind of taken on that role of the walkie-talkie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. I may have missed a few. I was trying to spot everyone that came up in the chat, but anyone else has a question, now is the chance to ask Betsy, either typing in the chat or raising your hand or unmuting yourself. That might be it.
I think Brian Gallagher has a question.
Brian, okay, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so I was just wondering that, so we're all here together, so we are doing peer-to-peer ourselves. Conferences are a great way for that. But I was just thinking that so we talk about all the problems a lot and we understand them, but is there anybody actually here who can affect any change with Next?
Good question. Anybody got a buddy over at Next?
Like, does anybody even know, like, who makes the decisions and what is the process for engaging change?
Excellent question.
Sorry, is that the elephant in the room? No?
Perhaps we should invite a Next representative to the next JELT call so they can give us the top-down perspective.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear their justifications for some of the decisions that they make.
Because I think probably that if you can influence somebody who's actually decision making at Next, it'd be a lot easier than all of us always fighting with our institution individually, because usually top down it just happens, whereas bottom up it's always, you always feel defeated.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I agree with you very much, and but I have had a positive experience recently when I joined our labor union. And suddenly I'm getting so much more information about how it is that we can fight these decisions that come down from on high, and how we can band together. So I don't know how many universities have labor unions, but if you do have one at your institution, I've only been a member for a few days now, but I'm already super happy that I joined.
Okay, I think that might be a good place to wrap up. We have 2 minutes, but I think that's a good place to stop. So thank you very much, Dr. Betsy Lavolette, for your presentation today. Thank you everyone for attending this session. If you have any remaining questions, you could gather in the lounge to continue the discussion. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And let's give Dr. Betsy Lavolette a big round of applause, either with a virtual emoji or with your real hands.
Thank you very much for your wonderful audience. Much more interesting to look at your faces and your avatars than my students' black screens. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now, and that's it. Okay, thank you very much.